Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to LSI for putting on another great event. We're thrilled to be here. I'll start off with an introduction, but before that, looking forward to this panel. You've got a great group on this panel with me that can provide great feedback, advice, tips, tricks, whatever you're looking for, from the perspective of both being the strategic side and giving advice from that perspective, as well as working with companies as they're approaching the strategics and being on that side of the table as well. So I've got a list of questions, but we certainly do want this to be interactive and make sure your questions are answered. So Susan Posner, I lead our MedTech and digital practice at Health Advances. We're a commercial strategy consulting firm working with clients to understand their markets, work their growth aspects, and really make sure we've got that plan put together. As part of doing that, about 40% of our work is transaction related. So we work with both strategics as well as private equity investors to perform commercial due diligence. And we also work with innovators such as yourself in preparing for those conversations, making sure you've got your strategic plan together, your business plan to put together that pitch deck or investor slides, and you're well prepared for those meetings. So looking forward to this conversation, and I'll let our panelists introduce themselves.
Okay, so Nate Harrington, currently with Philips. I'm a managing partner in our corporate venture capital group. I've been with Philips now for about 14 years. Prior to being on the CVC side, I was in business development and led a few acquisitions that created our IGT group, as we call it, image-guided therapy. Before Philips, I was at Boston Scientific for nearly a decade, had done a few acquisitions there. And before that, in product management, where I had a real job and I was an overhead. And before that was 6 years in management consulting, so about 2+ decades now in medtech.
Hi, Chris Bolten. I'm an IP attorney at Greenberg Traurig. I am based in Southern California. I do medtech IP. I represent about 60+ medtech companies, from the very beginning, some very early stage companies up to commercialization, and some of the biggest strategics as well. I also represent venture capital firms that are looking at companies from an IP diligence perspective, considering investing in them. My firm is a large global law firm, has an office in London, but I think about 2,500 attorneys across the US in 50 offices. As far as setting yourself up for success with strategics, I help companies build up their IP for investment, strategy, litigation, M&A. So I get some examples I was just talking to Nate about Philips. I worked with the company out of Paris called Cardiologs that is using AI to analyze electrocardiograms, so heart signals, and got them through various rounds of investment and then acquisition by Philips a few years ago. On the J&J side, I've been working with a company called V-Wave, which now is a lot of people have heard of now. Since 2009, they have an interatrial shunt for heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, HFrEF. They were announced to be acquired by J&J last year for, I think, up to $1.7 billion. I also have done work with Abiomed for years, and work with their now Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Naveen Kapoor, for a decade plus, and they were acquired a few years ago. And the other big name one was did the IP diligence for Sophie Nova Partners on Shockwave Medical for the original investment that they did about 12, 13 years ago, and they obviously got acquired by J&J as well. So thank you, J&J.
Happy to help. So I'm Edna Lazar. I'm with JJDC, which is the venture arm of Johnson & Johnson. I've been at JJDC for a year now. Prior to JJDC, I was with Edwards Life Sciences on their exploration team for over 4 years. And before that, I was at an incubator based in Israel that seeded really early stage projects. I was the chief business officer. I started my career in marketing, with J&J in the diabetes business. So I started doing real work. And then I moved back to Israel and I worked with startups. So for over 8 years, I was in 2 startups. The first one failed miserably, but only after we raised money and went through an IPO and even got to commercialization. The second one started really tough, but eventually we were able to raise money, and then we went through an M&A process with an American company called EndoChoice, which was later bought by Boston Scientific. So I've been in this roller coaster of startups, raising, not having money, going through M&A, going through closure, and also through the investment side.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gautam Kainth. I'm a partner with TCP Health Venture. TCP, or the Capital Partnership, we are an asset management firm based here in London for the last 27 years. At the group level, we manage $7 billion of assets, which are primarily focused on technology, venture capital investments. We started doing medtech investments almost 10 years ago. I joined the firm then. And since then, our strategy is more focused on medical devices and digital health. We don't do biotech. And primarily, we look at integration of medical science and technology as a larger offshoot of our technological vertical within the group. So far, we've deployed $200 million of capital. We have a portfolio of around 15 companies. We've had 3 exits, including one sale to J&J 5 years back. And we have 7 of the 12 companies that we have 7 strategics working with us in our companies, which are on the cap table of our existing companies as well. Selling to strategics is one of our main strategies in terms of creating an exit. We are happy to take the clinical risk, get an FDA approval or a CE mark, and we prepare companies for the strategic. So I'm very excited to be part of this panel and looking forward to an exciting discussion.
Great, great. So why don't we start right off with, I think, one of the tactical questions that we hear a lot, for those that are hoping for an eventual exit to a strategic. How do you get on the radar screen? How do you get those conversations? Is it ever too early? Who wants to start us off?
I'm happy to start. I don't think it's ever too early. I also think it's helpful to get on the radar when you're not asking for money as well. Sometimes it's always nice to not so much put the pressure on there or something that we have to react to. I also think it's fair to, in some ways, try to find your advocate within the business. And so for companies like us and JJDC or Johnson & Johnson, ultimately, the business is driving a lot of our decisions in terms of where we will invest. So I think it's always helpful to have a contact within the business. That being said, I think it's also helpful to be very transparent on working either with the VC arm or someone in business development. Ultimately, yes, you do want to get to a decision maker, and it's not us. But I think working with us and just being transparent can be very helpful. It can be frustrating sometimes when you've gotten a no or not now, not yet, and people are trying to come in through the windows, the front door, the chimney, any advocate, you can try to find. I understand that's your job. Just be transparent. And as far as getting on the radar, I would say one of the best ways to get on the radar in general from a strategic perspective is through our customers. So a lot of times if you're thinking about who are on your advisory boards and physicians, that's often how we hear about things.
Edna?
So fully agree. Build the relationships early. That's absolutely fine. We're never going to invest if we met you just yesterday morning, right? So it does take time to build that trust. Venues like this are a great place to get in touch and get to know you. My email, I feel, is visible and transparent to everyone. So I do get a lot of cold calls, LinkedIn, everything. Any way you want to reach us, it's fine. We know that's the way that you come, and that's one of the doors. Business development, again, is one of the doors as well. We always work with our BD partners. It's never just us, and it's never just our decision.
My advice would be, first of all, at a generic level, M&A is not about deal flow. It's about building relationships. Relationships are actually built over the years. They cannot be built within months or days over there. So you have to sort of cultivate that over a period of time and basically create the credibility and as well as trust, like walk the talk. This is what we plan to do for the next 6 months, and then see them again 6 months later and tell them, oh, this is what we've done and this is the plan. So you build that credibility over a period of time. It needs investment of time. And that's the broader principle. The second factor that I will say in terms of creating is basically attracting strategics is you create a pull factor. You create that pull factor by having, say, solid key opinion leaders on your board. You hire or work with ex-employees of strategics to get certain insights. So by accessing the back-end channel, sort of you create that pull factor, and then that also helps a lot in many of the situations that we've seen.
Great. I think one of the things we talked about is during our planning session is that in these innovative companies, they're fast, they're nimble, they're moving quickly, and sometimes, companies, especially the larger strategics, may not be as quickly responsive as we might be used to on the innovator side. Can you give any tips for that, or perhaps even, give us a view under the tent, what's going on the strategic side? Why are things taking more time? And any advice? Is it okay to ping again?
I think it's always fine to ping again. One thing which I very much try to do is manage expectations. I tend to be fairly blunt and transparent, and usually one thing I would encourage is say, when is it appropriate to follow up? I'm always very much an advocate of, if you haven't heard from me within X period of time, you are free to harass me, because we need to follow up with what we're supposed to do. Now, that being said, these are unfortunately large, complicated organizations where sometimes you have to deal with stakeholders internally. And from your perspective, looking in from the outside, you don't know what other deals or issues are coming up that may take some of our attention. So the best thing I can say is try to have straightforward communications. Let us know what timelines you have. And that's why I think it's always important to start early. No one ever likes to be in the position as a startup where you're running out of money. So be as transparent as possible and demand that from your strategic.
I'll add that you probably don't want to get a really quick answer, because the quickest answer that we can provide is no, we're sorry, we're not interested in investing. So that keep that in mind. And if you want the real honest feedback, be it a yes or a no, by the way, sometimes we may say not now and provide you with valuable feedback, which is something that I do try to all the time. Like, I can always say no, but it will come with some sort of advice if you want to listen. But it's true. I mean, we have a lot of stakeholders that we have to check in inside. And if we do our job right, we check with everyone, and it takes time. And also people, at least at J&J, change roles all the time. They switch people on us. The BD team reorganizes itself and people move. So sometimes, it takes time for them to get up to speed, and it just takes time to get that answer back. I assure you, at least, in the JJDC side, when we get an answer, we try to communicate it as quickly as possible. And the longer the relationship has been, that's, I typically jump on a call with someone if I have that relationship with them, and not just send them an email saying, hey, sorry, we're not. So again, be patient. Understand it takes us time to get an answer. And like I said, you don't want to hear the quick answer.
And my advice, just to add, is basically during that period of wait, try to educate yourself. The best thing about strategics is they come up on a quarterly basis. Most of them are listed. They do analyst calls. They publish their results. They give commentary. To try to join their investor call commentary as well, where the management team, the senior management speaks about their strategies and the vision. Try to align your objectives and your strategy with that. And that will give you a backdoor again, sort of a pulse of their strategy and the focus. And honestly, as we work, our companies work a lot with the strategics. Personally, I also join some of the investor calls of the strategics just to get a pulse. What are the segments that they're focusing upon? What is like, and that keeps on changing on a quarterly basis. Like they do M&A, they do divestitures, so all of it. So just be on the top of that. And information is available to everyone. So we try to educate ourselves, and that's what my advice to all the founders would also be: utilize that time to sort of understand that better.
Great, thanks. Chris, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about how strategics are looking at IP, how that might vary from as this group here has talked to VCs about IP, and what advice you might have, and a little bit information about that process.
Sure, yeah. I think that there's a lot of similarities between the way they look at IP as compared to VCs. A lot of strategics now have venture arms that are looking at investment early on, and will often syndicate with VCs. And sometimes the VCs will take the lead on IP, and other times, I've seen recently JJDC took a lead in the deal. So I think that as you move along, how much depth goes into IP, it gets deeper as there's more money being raised, as there's more, if you're in an acquisition, depending on the size of an acquisition. And obviously the goal is to be able to protect a product that they're either investing in or acquiring. And one of the key ways to do that is IP. And so it's not just having IP either. It's not, oh, we've checked a box, we've got some patents. It's, do you have really good patents that can prevent others from encroaching on this space? Because if you're going to spend a lot of money on a company, you want to make sure that you have a competitive advantage. And one of the ways to do that is a very solid IP protection. So it's not just a box checking exercise, especially as you get further along. It's critical, and it's going to make a big, I've seen it help deals go forward. I've seen deals end because of IP situation. So not only does the company have very strong IP positioning, but freedom to operate and what's happening with third-party IP is also going to be something that's critical, something that companies should be aware of and be able to respond and talk about.
Great, thank you. We talked about approaching different companies, and you probably all have your list on who you think you should approach and who's in your area. And Gautam, you mentioned that, going on the investor calls, but things change all the time. How close to the core versus how far adjacent would you recommend companies go when thinking about who to approach? Because they may be thinking down the line about that string of pearls. What's your experience there, and what advice would you give this group in terms of how inclusive and broad to be on their list of who to get those meetings with?
So the way I would look at it is basically finding that strategic fit. And I would look at it into two parts. First is the commercial sales infrastructure that they have. And then second is the product strategy fit. So to me, if your device or your product is not a match within their existing sales infrastructure, don't waste your time. As in, that is a must-have. That needs to definitely happen. Now, within this product strategic focus, of course, if your product is core and related to that, then definitely you can explore a conversation about an M&A. That's an obvious sort of a link to that. But if you're ancillary to their strategic focus, then you can explore like a VC investment from their arm. So that's how you sort of channelize and basically explore your strategy in terms of dealing with it.
Yeah. So J&J has a lot of businesses. We are broad in our offerings. I would say if you're clearly in our sweet spot, okay, bullseye, then that's a no-brainer. Send us the information. We'll of course happily look. The further you are from our bullseye, so as you kind of like spread, I think it is your role to prove to us that this is something that has synergies and we should look at it and invest. So, I mean, I know in general, kind of like our businesses, I know all the unmet needs of all the different businesses, but connect the dots for us. Because sometimes you see something that, is, oh, of course, that's an adjacency that has to go with your core business. I don't see it. So don't just send an email saying, hey, this is what I have to offer. I think this will work for JJ. Go through the whole exercise of, does it really? Is it the call point? Is it the technology? Is it kind of like in the patient journey, this falls well? Like whatever it is that connects you to our business, again, as long as you're not in the bullseye, then you have to do that connection. Sometimes you have a brilliant idea and I'm just not aware of what's happening in the head. So just make sure that it is. And if it's out of scope, it's out of scope. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. Like Edna said, we're often in the business of getting to fast no's. And if we can rule something out, we will, because we want to spend our time on things that we think are more promising. That being said, it is always worth taking the check. If it's an adjacency and you can see some relevance, you don't necessarily know what's happening in terms of our strategy and what we're thinking. Those are the types of things which aren't necessarily on analyst calls. So it's worth checking in, but yeah, if it's a hard no, it's probably a hard no, unless there's something that we're missing, and always open to being educated on that. Nothing more.
As we're talking about the different strategics and investors, they're, especially in your roles, there's investments happening by oftentimes more than one strategic. How should these companies think about navigating more than one strategic investor? How do you feel about being the second strategic investor? And we know that strategic priorities could change down the line. So how should they manage that and think about that? Who wants to start us off?
Not me.
Yeah. So I think one of the first questions one has to ask themselves is, do you want to have a strategic on the cap table? I think there are probably more pros than cons, but like with anything, you need to be thoughtful about the type of arrangements you have with a strategic if they're joining the cap table, and be very careful about strategic rights. We want the traditional rights that most preferred investors have. So I just think you need to be savvy about that. Now, I think most strategics like to be the star of the show and be the only one on the cap table, for probably obvious reasons. But candidly, in your roles, you should be thinking about having potentially more than one strategic on your cap table. The other thing I would emphasize is be very careful and do your diligence on those strategics, and frankly, even the partners at the venture level who would be on your board, to make sure that they play well in the sandbox. I think most of us who've been doing this for a while, I'm in very good relations with most of my colleagues at the other medtech companies, and that sort of matters. So I would say, yes, having multiple strategics is a consideration. Be careful what you ask for, but it's a reality of how things work.
Yeah. There's also there are strategics that are directly competing with each other, and your product is interesting to both. And there are some that are looking at it from different angles, and then they can complement each other. And that's actually, that's a positive, having two strategics on the cap table. I would say for J&J, we have some situations where we're two strategics on the cap table and on the board. and some were just, alone. So you're right. I mean, it's pick the right strategics for you, pick the right people. Some people can work well together even if they're competing, and some it'll get your board to be dysfunctional. So just make sure that you're on your pulse. But yeah, do what's good for your company.
And I think based upon our experience, it works both ways. In a particular situation, it was very difficult for us when we were setting a company. One of the strategics, another strategic was on the cap table. We ended up wasting 6 months just to negotiate rights, and the deal was on the verge of collapse as well. So we've learned from that. That was many years ago, and I think the best way is, as Nate mentioned, is basically how you document and basically document that relationship and think of a deadlock scenario. If you're dealing with two strategics, what rights do they have, and if theoretically there is a deadlock, then what follows after that? So you have to visualize all of those scenarios in your documents and create a way out. The worst case scenario is to basically have a stalemate there. So it's dealing with fire in simple words, and you want to visualize that situation of conflict for sure, years in advance.
Great. I'll ask another question, and I do have more, but after this question, I do want to open it up to all of you. Make sure we're addressing the questions that are on your mind. I think we've all seen a lot of SIMs, confidential information presentations, investor decks, pitch decks, and some of them, the message and your value comes right off the table, and others where there might be a little bit more that can be done in terms of clarity or making sure they get their IP story across. If you could each give, 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice to make sure that when you're preparing that document, when you're meeting with this team, when you're bringing it to the strategics, what do you like to see, and what is it important to have in there, nicely, concisely stated?
I mean, the first thing is you want to make sure there's alignment in the space and that you're addressing a meaningful unmet need, and that it's something that a strategic is going to prioritize. So I think being compelling in your value proposition matters. And then there's basically 4 very simple questions that I tend to ask at various stages. And I'll say it as, does it work? That's one step. Can you prove it? Will someone buy it? And can you make money? And I think a lot of times people tend to focus on the first one that works, your clinical strategy, can you prove it? And I think a lot of times people will miss out on the market access or health economics or reimbursement of will someone buy that? Because ultimately you can have a fantastic technology, and you just need to be prepared if it's a long road to hoe, so to speak, in terms of the reimbursement pathway. So it's nice when you have established reimbursement, wonderful, or if it fits in with something where there's a very clear value proposition, great. And, the last part sometimes people forget is, can you make money? AI is a great example. There's very little IP around AI. And so while it adds tremendous value, how you capture that value and monetize it can be a bit challenging. And often I don't look at companies as being AI companies. They're companies that are solving a problem, back to the first point that really matters. And they are AI enabled. And that's what makes them potentially more valuable. Unfortunately, AI is just becoming a feature rather than a product. And so I think, looking at those 4 questions, does it work? Can you prove it? Will people buy it? And can you make money? You want to make sure that at some point, depending upon where you are in your pathway, that you can address those questions.
I think from an IP perspective, with your pitch deck, I would say get feedback from your IP counsel on the IP slide. It's you want to make sure you're saying the right things and that it's consistent. And frankly, I think having your IP counsel look at your whole pitch deck too. I mean, I've seen too many times where I'm talking with a company, I'm doing IP diligence, and they give the whole pitch on these great features, and okay, how does the IP align with those features? And there's a disconnect. So, keeping your IP counsel up to date on the features, what you're telling people are key, and then making sure that the strategy is aligned is going to make you look a lot better during an IP diligence, whether through a VC or a strategic.
Yes. So agree with everything, and I would stress the unmet need. What makes you stand out most is if you've done your homework. So homework as far as, J&J, J&J as a whole, the specific business unit that you are targeting, even as far as knowing kind of like me. Okay. So this information is completely public. So everything here is, I would say, is the must-haves in order to convince us. But if you want to take it a step higher, then just do a lot of homework before you approach us. Don't assume that you can come in with your, pitch deck and pitch the same thing to everyone and make it, and win on all of those. You have to tailor it to the person. You have to tailor it to the company and the situation too.
Very simply, I'll say you will have to look after clinical, regulatory, reimbursement, total addressable market size, clinical, unit economics, and your commercial model. So all the 6 components, I would say, basically are very critical. And you need to have sort of like your children. You have 6 children to look after. Just focus each and every one of them, not just one. So.
And I'll just put in, I agree with all of that. We see a lot of pitch decks and as I mentioned, working with a lot of clients. And I think sometimes you're very used to seeing something, so it's very intuitive to you. But really laying it out clearly, well, what is your differentiation? How are you going to compete in this market? How is your value proposition different? Because we certainly have worked, where I've worked with clients and I've looked at them and said, I'm not exactly sure here what they're doing. And then somehow we've made it to the stage of diligence and then we figure it out. But if, so bring it to others and make sure it's clear. And yeah, the market access piece, we get into it, great idea, but have you done your homework and you've gone through and laid out the value prop, the clinical argument, as well as the economic argument of how and why it's going to be paid. And if you need a new code, how you're going to get there, why value analysis committee is going to take this. So, but lay it out nice and clear. So we don't have to spend our time on that first read, figuring it out, because might not get past that first read. Any questions from the audience? And I'm happy to keep asking questions, but here's your chance. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, I've taken numerous companies to strategics, and sometimes you enter into a conversation of feedback saying we need more clinical data. And there's always this catch-22 as to how much do you listen to that and how much of a diversion from your core program that is. So I just welcome people's sort of thoughts on, okay, I'm an innovator, I'm looking for feedback, I've got some feedback from you. Is that something I should absolutely go out of my way to do? Is it something I should just park on and think about as a future program? So just that piece would be interesting.
I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
So you're saying that someone's given you feedback, you have your core approach, and then they're saying, well, have you thought about this?
Oh.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's a discussion I would say you want to have with your board. Remember, strategics have their own interests at heart. They also, you'd like to believe, are somewhat informed on the unmet needs. And so it's worth reflecting on. I mean, sometimes your ultimate market may not be the fastest way to get to market. And so I'm always very mindful that you don't want to confuse your regulatory strategy with your commercial strategy. I mean, I think the short answer is it depends, but try to understand why they're giving you that
Right.
advice. Is it something that's purely their self-interest, or is it something that you might not be seeing in the same way?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a bit of a catch-22. So you want to be, listen, you guys know, but also how it works at Joe. Dave said is, I realize strategies change. So, there's a kind of pivot or something like that, but then you
Yeah. I think do you pivot just because you had a conversation with a strategic? Probably not. Yeah. Yeah. But does it give you kind of like, hey, this is something I should inquire. This is something I should know. Again, reflect on? Absolutely. Why not?
Ask another strategic. Yeah, you ask 4 and you'll probably get 6 answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe a question on how to measure progress in the interactions with the strategics. Like you could be spending a lot of times, maybe dinners, meetings, different people from different departments. What is a good way to measure progress versus a lot of back and forth? Like when do you know you're in the right track for something serious, or is that, just to understand the other side?
It's a great question. It depends with whom you're talking about. I think you'll find people like me and Edna tend to be a little bit more blunt and upfront because honestly, we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste our time. And I think sometimes people in the business have a hard time saying no. It's always tough telling someone you're not quite fit, and it's easier to do that. I would just try to be as explicit, get explicit answers about what are the next steps, what do you want to see, and just seeking clarity. I mean, everyone has different styles about how they like to engage. And some people are more, I will say, marketing and sort of sales oriented, and they're going to schmooze and talk about it and whatever. And others are going to be more cutting to the chase. I would know your audience is always a big thing. Know who you're talking to, what their motivations are, and how they're approaching this, and just try to tactfully pin people down. Thoughts.
Yeah. And that's part of building that relationship, right? The longer the relationship, the more you get to kind of like feel if there is something there or not. You build the trust, and then if you have that, then that person on the other end, on the strategic side, will probably tell you, hey, listen, we're not going to invest anytime soon. We're going to need to see this and this and that. So, yeah.
No. Just to add one thing, I'll say basically in terms of the wider relationship management within that organization is also very important. If they introduce you to their BD team, their clinical team, their associated key opinion leaders, so that's a progression in itself, which happens over a period of time, and I will take it as a positive. If that doesn't happen after 1 or 2 years of engagement, then that's very disappointing.
Hi everyone, Alessio Beverino from Panacus. If I go back to the exit, which is the reason why most of the startups took to strategics. 10 years ago, 50% of the exit were pre-revenue, post-clinical, post-regulatory approval. Nowadays, it's less than 10% at post-clinical, post-regulatory approval. Now, developing a product takes time. Regulatory takes time, clinical takes time, and if you want to go commercial takes time, and time is money. So do you believe that, and if you look at the latest exit, we have been talking about Shockwave, Inari, Organox, they were all making revenue, right? Mm-hmm. And real revenue, not just few penny. So do you think that in the future, except for a few cases, which is still cardiovascular, mostly, we will go back to post-clinical, post-regulatory approval, FDA, let's say, kind of exit, or is going to be worse than worse? So you guys really need 50, 100 million revenue.
The short answer is it depends. The more nuanced one, I think you've pointed out a good caveat and exception, like with cardiovascular. and that can clearly talk to things which are acquired pre-revenue. I mean, we've done that too. Boston does it. I mean, sometimes it's flipping the data card. And if you know what you're looking for and the market's well established, there's reimbursement, and it's just a known thing, these tend to be very competitive types of assets, and they will go. I think the key thing is to know when you're not like that, which is why I say it depends. And I think the more you look at, say, 510K types of products, it's not quite as clear. The other distinction I would make too is sometimes it's not about the amount of revenue, but let's say it's post-commercial. It's more about, can you demonstrate within some key accounts that you are able to take share, you're able to have stickiness. And what I mean by this is sometimes you don't need to waste a lot of investor money on building out a massive sales force and getting to that point. And, sometimes with Shockwave, for example, they had multiple opportunities where they could have exited early, but it wasn't satisfying to the board. They believed in higher. So by default, it got that big. Sometimes you're able to show it with less. So I think there's always going to be those types of market segments where things will go early, and people or companies are willing to endure the burn. And then there are others where you need enough commercial proof points. And then there are some where you have to take it to another stage, or the board chooses to take it to another stage because they think they're going to get the value. And depending upon what the valuation is, you may be backing yourself into an IPO only situation because the given strategics for whatever the technology or spaces aren't willing to pay what the shareholders would like. And then you deal with the implications of that, which could be dilution and a whole bunch of other unpleasant things. I'll pause. I'm sure others have thoughts.
Yeah, and I think we're out of time. Do we have a moment? No, we can't. Okay, well then I guess we will wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.